Well, chapter 13 and 14, 15, they really all tie right together. So I don't know if we'll make it all the way through chapter 14 today, but it's okay because we'll just pick up and go right into chapter 15 next week. But remember, they had gone from the Mount Sinai into the wilderness of Paran. We're not sure exactly where that is, but we've guesstimated it. And then from there, they went to the valley of Sin, or at least the spies did. We're not sure. And then from there, the 12 spies went on in. Now, we learn from chapter 13, they called it Kadesh. But later, we'll discover they called the place Kadesh Barnea, which is a very important location throughout the scripture, Kadesh Barnea. And from there, they are on the border of the land. The 12 spies go. They take quite a long time. And finally, at the very end, they stop by the valley of Eshcol and pick up some giant grapes. And two guys with a pole had to carry them. You couldn't carry a bundle of them. If you grabbed a bundle of them, it'd be like 300 pounds. You're like, oh. So they had to have these hundreds of pounds and came back and showed the people. And what's funny when you read chapter 13 is they're talking about how wonderful the land is, but there were two youngsters that got to go along, Joshua and Caleb. And while these guys were talking about how good it was and how great and how everything God said was true, it was a land filled with milk and honey, finally young Caleb jumps in there and turn back to chapter 13 to verse 30 there in your Bibles. And Caleb quieted the people before Moses, and he said, "Let's go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." So he thought they were all on the same page. But the two youngsters had been talking, Joshua and Caleb, and they were on the same page. But they were surprised at the other 10 guys. And that's in Numbers chapter 13, verse 31 to 33. But the men who had gone up from him said, "We are not able to go up against these people, for they are stronger than we." Whoa. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report. I like the old King James here. It says an evil report. And I agree. It was evil, full of hard-heartedness, unbelief, and it goes on to say, the land which they spied out, saying, "The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants." Really? They seem to make it back just fine. "And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. Therefore we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight." Grasshoppers, they were big. We know later with David and Goliath, they were big, but they weren't grasshoppers in comparison. Big exaggerations. But that's what a heart of faith or lack of faith does, right? The natural man cannot receive the things of the Spirit. They're foolishness to them. And we looked last time in Isaiah 40 where God actually uses this term. It says God sits above the circles of the earth and its inhabitants are as grasshoppers to him. See, if they were, the one thing you'll find in these 10 spies in their evil report, not once do they mention God. Not once does God come into their thinking. In a minute, we're going to see Caleb and Joshua. They can't leave God out of a sentence. Interesting, the two mindsets of faith and unbelief, or not even unbelief, it's just out and out rebellion in their hearts. And God just couldn't fit into that equation of unbelief. Now, it's interesting because we happen to know at this point, it's but a year earlier, right? I mean, we come to 13 months at the end of Leviticus. So they're on the 14th month, and then they left on the second month. So we're about 15, 16 months since they left Egypt. Do you guys remember anything powerful that happened in Egypt? I mean, the 10 plagues. They saw Pharaoh come to his knees. They saw the largest empire, this most rich empire, the largest army in the known world at that time was brought to its knees. And they knocked on the Egyptians' doors and they gave them all their wealth. And then they were at the Red Sea. Remember then back in Exodus 14, verse 13 and 14, Moses said to them, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. And the Egyptians whom you see today shall be no more forever. And the Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace." This is a few months earlier. I mean, it wasn't like it was 100 years ago, and their great-great-great-grandparents told them about it. But yet, in truth, we learn from later scriptures that the Canaanites, these giants, and the people behind these giant fortified walls were terrified of them. Joshua chapter 2, if you want to turn there, this is the story of Rahab. And she hides the spies, you remember? And she said, "Oh, we are so terrorized because we know the Lord," tetragrammaton, L, capital O, capital R, D, "is with you. And the terror of you has fallen upon us and all the inhabitants of the land, and we are faint-hearted because of you." And then in verse 11 of Joshua 2, he goes on to say, "Our hearts melted," she said. There did not remain any more courage in anyone because of you, because of the Lord your God. He is the God in heaven above and on earth beneath." Rahab wasn't terrified of the men. She was terrified of the God behind the men. And so was the whole place. And they were correct. The pagans were correct. They sized up the situation correctly because they had God in their equation. And they knew that God would be against them. In Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 25, it says, "This day I begin to put the dread and the fear of you upon the nations under the whole heaven. You shall hear the report of who shall hear the report of you shall tremble and be in anguish because of you." Before you even get there, before you get over the Jordan, these people are wetting themselves. And when they get to Jericho, that's exactly the case. The psalmist said that was already happening. It was already happening before the spies went in. It says in Psalms 29:8, "The voice of the Lord shakes the wilderness. The Lord shakes the wilderness of Kadesh." Of course, David, he had to confront a lot of armies. You know what? He had to confront a giant. And he was but a little boy with a slingshot. But I love that he struggled with fear. He had to deal with that fear, didn't he? In Psalm 27, I love the whole psalm, but I restrained myself and only put 3 verses there. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I be afraid? When the wicked came against me to eat up my flesh, my enemies and foes, they stumbled and fell. Though an army may encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war may rise against me, and in this I will be confident." And he goes on. And we looked at last week so many verses. We walked by faith, not by sight. When we saw these giants, and we knew that this is a country that devours people, and we understood that we were like grasshoppers and they had no fear of us. They were completely wrong. Again, Hebrews 11 says, "Faith is a substance of things hoped for, but evidence of things not seen." So I got this substance, but I can't see it. And all the men of old gained approval. Not one of them gained approval apart from faith. Right? Noah believed in rain when it never had happened before. Abraham left his whole family and went hundreds of miles to a place where God said, "This will be your land. I'll be your God. You'll be my people." Boy, we can keep on going down the line. But we all have to wrestle with this mind, huh? Greater is he that is in you than he who's in the world. No weapon formed against you will prosper. Boy, Paul wrestled with this. You remember 2 Corinthians chapter 1? Paul says, man, we are pushed beyond strength, beyond measure, above strength, despairing of life itself. We had the sense of death within ourselves. And then he said later in 2 Corinthians 10, in verse 3 through 6, he said, the weapons although we walk in the flesh, we don't war in the flesh. The weapons of our warfare are not carnal or of this earth, but are mighty in God, pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. And the next verse is, I never quite get it, but in this context of Numbers 14, it makes sense. It says, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. Interesting. Well, we are now in Numbers chapter 1. Or Numbers chapter 14, verse 1. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept all night. When a little baby is wet or hungry and they cry, it's precious, isn't it? But when a spoiled brat falls down in Walmart because he doesn't get that plastic thing right now, that is annoying. And understand that we see in this chapter, it's the whole congregation had this heart of unbelief. In verse 1, it says all the congregation. In verse 2, it says all the children of Israel. Verse 2, it also says the whole congregation. Verse 7, it's going to say all the congregation. Verse 10, all the congregation. Again in verse 10, all the children of Israel. There was this spirit of unbelief, this demonic spirit of rebellion. And they're upset that God isn't making it easy for them. We've got to walk by faith. Chuck said before, when I get to heaven, the happiest thing I'm going to be about is I don't have to walk by faith anymore. He goes, I hate it, but it's the very thing I need. And Peter, boy, he talks a lot about it, didn't he? We've got those trials. We've got the testing of our faith. It's necessary. You're just a bunch of big dirt clod with some gold in there, but you got to go into the fire, right? To get all the other alloys off to become pure gold. And we don't like it, and it's usually temporary, but we've got to have our faith tested, and their faith is being tested, and they're mad at God about it. And they're blaming him. This unbelief and fear. It says we've lost. We can't do it. We're going to find out their only advice to themselves was go back to Egypt. Well, in verse 2, so all the children of Israel complained, murmured against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in Egypt, if only we had died in the wilderness, anywhere along the way would have do. But Joshua and Caleb understood this rebellious spirit and that it was against God. And so in a minute, they're going to say, do not rebel against the Lord in verse 9. And God's going to say, how long will these people reject me? So understand it. It's not somebody struggling to believe. I love that story in the Gospels where the demon-possessed daughter is not, the demon's not coming out, and Jesus comes down from the Mount of Figuration, and he says to the man, only believe. And the guy comes back, I believe, but help my unbelief. How many times have we felt that way? I mean, that sentence just does not work. I mean, it's just an illogical sentence. I believe, but help my unbelief. It's true. That was his feelings, and it was honest. And so I don't think that God is upset when we are challenged and even fell in walking by faith. This is not what this was. This was an unbelief that turned into a hardness of heart, that turned into rebellion. And just like the devil, they see God as evil, and he has brought them out of Egypt to be evil to them in the wilderness, and to be evil to get their hopes up that they could go into the promised land, which was never a possibility to begin with. The whole thing was a con by this God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The whole thing is a lie. Many times they'll say this. They actually said this back in Exodus, right before Moses says, "Don't fear, stand still." They actually said this. Because there were no graves in Egypt, he says in verse 11 and 12 of Exodus 14, because there's no graves in Egypt, have you taken us to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us like this, bringing us out of Egypt? It is not the word that you told us in Egypt, saying, "Let us alone." Didn't we say this? "Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians." And for it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we die in the wilderness. That's Exodus 14. They said it, and he said, "Stand still." And they walked across on dry ground. And they looked back, and the waters killed that great Egyptian army. And then they started singing and praising. Remember that? But now, it doesn't help them. Don't you think it would say, man, God just conquered the biggest army in the world. The second and third and fourth biggest is no big deal. I mean, wouldn't that be logical? I love that saying. God's past faithfulness demands our current trust in him. Well, verse 3. Why has the Lord brought us into this land? I'll tell you, to fall by the sword. That our wives and our children should be victims, in other words, raped and slaves. Would it not have been better for us to return to Egypt? We started to so many times, and we didn't. Now I see that would have been the best plan, to go back and apologize to the Egyptians and grovel and see if they'll make us slaves again. But what we will discover, no giants were needed to cause their wives and children to die. Their unbelief would kill them in the desert. Their deep state of unbelief and rebellion. They accuse God of being evil and a murderer. Remember James chapter 1, verse 13? Let no one say when he's tempted or being tried, I am being tried by God or tempted by God in an evil way. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he himself tempt anyone. James 1, 16 and 17. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good gift, every perfect gift is from above, comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. Don't be deceived. There's no evil in God. And when the heat's being turned up and you're going through the valley of the shadow of death, God hasn't changed. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever, right? He is good. He loves you. Every good thing has come down from him. Boy, in the Psalms, they really nail this, how it is rebellion. In Psalm 95, verse 8 and 9, it says, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. That's what they actually call chapter 13 and 14, the rebellion. As in the day of the trial in the wilderness, when your fathers tested me, God speaking, they tried me, though they saw my work. The very moment they're saying God hates us and wants us to see our daughters and wives raped by these giants, enslaved, and they're looking up. Pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. They're sitting there munching on manna going, God hates us. Hey, can you pass me some more of that manna there? Yeah, he's evil. He wants to kill us all. This is a big plot. Here, let me have some more manna. Well, Hebrews chapter 3. Look at this if you would. And boy, the pieces of Hebrews, the puzzle of Hebrews starts falling together as we're studying these very scriptures. Therefore, it says in Hebrews 3, verse 7 to 13 first, we'll look at this. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. Chapters 13 and 14 of Numbers. In the day of the trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me and tried me and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with that generation and said, they always go astray in their hearts, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Beware, brethren, lest any of you have an evil heart of unbelief and departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily, while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. In Hebrews chapter 3, verse 16 and 19, it goes on to say, for who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? Now with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? But those who did not obey, or those who did not believe. It depends on the textual variance. I think it's believe, not obey, but believe. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Now you remember Hebrews, what it's about? It's about the Jewish Christians saying we're giving up Christianity and we're going back to Judaism. You remember this? And so he's saying, in essence, you're going back to Egypt. And this is what he's going to convince them, saying it's the same spirit as your fathers when they wanted to go back to Egypt and harden their heart. It's better for us to return. Think of this. They are just rejecting a life of faith. They are rejecting the promise of God. It's not just a lack of faith, it is an unbelief. They are unbelieving God, saying, God has lost his power. God has lost his goodness. God has lost his honesty. God has lost his faithfulness. God has lost his love. Do you see the difference? God is not good. God is not love. It's all a farce. I think that every Christian has to find this out for himself, right? I mean, God has no grandchildren, only children, right? So even kids growing up in the church have to come to that place where they're like, do I believe or not believe? I've been following this because my parents, have been in control. But now that I'm 14, I'm in control of my life. And I'm smarter than my parents anyway. And I will decide. And it's like, yeah, you will have to decide. But this unbelief caused a hardness of heart. And it caused their brains, understand, a hardness of heart and unbelief and rebellion against God. It tweaks the brain. It literally causes the brain to not function. Logically, if God could break the power of Egypt, the most powerful nation on the earth, with 10 simple plagues over a few months, couldn't he take care of the giants? If God could cause the Red Sea to become dried up in an instant, and they walked across on dry ground, and then to look back to see the Egyptian army destroyed by the waters of the Red Sea, couldn't God get them across the Jordan safely? If God, through us, with Joshua and our generals, win a military battle against the Amalekites. Do you remember that? Almost instantly, Joshua had to go lead a battle against these military forces of the Amalekites, and God caused them to win. Of course, Moses had to pray and keep the arms up. If God can bring water out of a rock, can you believe this? They watch water come out of a rock, and they watch manna rain from heaven. I'm getting exhausted talking about all the things these guys have experienced in a little over a year. Just take a note, guys. I mean, this is the cautionary tale. Seeing miracles does not translate to faith in the heart. Our human, sinful nature will quickly unbelieve what we saw. Maybe it wasn't a miracle. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was just, Then God, if God can do all these things in the last, almost every single month, almost every single day in the last 15, 16 months, if we've seen God do miracle after miracle, manna from heaven, water over rock, pillar of fire, and cloud by day and night, surely God can take care of our next problem. But this ugly heart of rebellion caused them to not only reject God in heaven, but also to reject his leaders on earth. Notice verse 4. They said to one another, "Let us select a leader and return to Egypt." Understand here the depths of how this is now man-centered. When you have unbelief, you're no longer looking at God. You're looking at yourself. Notice what they said first. They said, "Let us select a leader, and then let us return." So first of all, let's say to one another, let's us decide. Let's quit talking about this God guy. Let's be realistic here. They literally have made themselves greater than God. Their majority vote is wiser than God. So let us say to one another, let us select from ourselves the right leader, the kind of leader we've always needed, one who is rebellious and hard as us and will take us back to Egypt. Isn't that interesting? When men are in the flesh, they want leaders who will give them the flesh. We don't want some leader telling us to walk by faith. Don't get into those Moses types. We don't want any of those spiritual types. We just want a good earth leader. Now, as we're going through this story, I just want to stop and make a very important note. This story of rebellion of chapter 13 and 14 was never actually written by God for the Jews. This story's never helped the Jews. Do you know who it's written for? Us. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 1 through 6. Really, a lot of verses there, all the way to verse 11, but we won't read it tonight. "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea. They were baptized, if you would, into Moses and the cloud and in the sea. They ate spiritual food. They drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them." That's an interesting point. We're going to see this water come out of that rock again, but they're in a very different location. That rock that brought water was following them. And that rock was Christ. There was more than just water they drank. It was a spiritual significance that they understood how special that was. Boy, don't you want that water that came out of that rock? It's got to be the best tasting water ever. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things, listen to verse 6, "These things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted." The evil thing was they didn't want to walk by faith. Verse 11, he's going to give some more examples out of Numbers. We'll read it at a later date. But in verse 11, he says, "Now all these things happened to them as examples, for they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come." Truly, that is us. Romans 15:4, Paul says something similar. "For whatever things were written before were written for our learning, that we, through the patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope." Patience. That's what the last days believers need, isn't it? We're in the wilderness. It says you can go and from east to west trying to find the word of God preached, and it'll not be found. Well, we'll probably get arrested for it next year. But it's an interesting thing that these rebellious hard hearts that we're looking at is something that the last days believers are going to be wrestling with in these evil times. Well, look at verse 5. We are cranking it out now. Verse 5 through 9. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. They did this many, many times. We saw Abraham back in Genesis 17 fall on his face. In Leviticus 9, they fell on their face. We're going to see this in chapter 16, verse 4, verse 22, verse 45, and then again in Numbers 20, verse 6. All kinds of falling on the face here. Before all the assembly of the congregation and children of Israel, but Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land. Notice what these two young boys did. They tore their clothes. That is a sign of deep mourning and grief. And they, that is Joshua and Caleb, spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delights in us, then, or that word if can also be since. Since the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us. A land flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Now here are the exhortations in verse 9. Nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. One man said they're bread and butter. They're our bread. It's like saying they are not even a meal. They are a simple snack. They are an easy snack to eat, those giants. Their protection has departed from them. The word protection in the Hebrew is the same word shadow. Matter of fact, in the Psalms 91, it says, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. That's the same word, protection. So it's like the feathers of the hen guarding her young ones, and they're all curled up inside her. This is the word protection or shadow. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. And then he says it again, do not fear them. So Moses and Aaron fall on their face. Young Joshua and Caleb next to them are ripping their clothes in grief. And this young boy gets up and is a leader, and he's exhorting them and saying to them, guys, don't do this. It's all laid out. It's exactly as God has said. You know, how hard of it would it have been for those 12 spies in this beautiful land, green and rivers and mountains and hills and animals and all of these grapevines and all kinds of other fruit, to then come back out to the desert of Sin. I bet living in that desert was 10 times harder than it ever was before. And they're like, I don't want to do this. Get out of the desert. Let's go, guys. Come on. Now, we will learn in chapter 32 who the real identity of Caleb is. Right now, it tells us he's the son of Jephunneh of the tribe of Judah. But actually, he wasn't Jewish at all. And we will discover that later. But anyway, this land is exceedingly good. There are bread, there are butter, their shadow, their protection is gone from them. Do not fear. Now, you guys remember when they crossed the Red Sea? And who led that singing and dancing? You guys remember? Miriam. Now, we all probably remember the first stanza of that song, right? Remember that song? I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and rider cast into the sea. So that's about Pharaoh falling into the sea and dying. But she also we learned in chapter 12, was a prophetess. And she prophesied in the second stanza, but we often got so caught up in the first stanza, we didn't see the second part of this song. So let's look at that. In Exodus chapter 15, verse 13 to 18, this prophecy of Miriam. You in your mercy have led forth the people whom you have redeemed. You have guided them in your strength to your holy habitation. The people will hear and be afraid. Talking about the people in the land of Canaan, the enemies of Israel. Sorrow will take hold of the inhabitants of Philistilia, the Philistines. The chief of Edom will be dismayed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, will take hold of them. All the inhabitants of Canaan will melt away. Fear and dread will fall on them. But the greatness of your arm, they will be as still as a stone. Till your people pass over, O Lord, till your people pass over, whom you have purchased. You will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which you have made for your own dwelling. Wow. The sanctuary, O Lord, which your hands have established, the Lord shall reign forever and ever. So she not only prophesied the immediate, but all the way up to the millennial period, when Jesus would be dwelling there and ruling and reigning there from Jerusalem. She prophesied that they would be afraid, that they would melt away. And so Caleb and Joshua said, the Lord delights in us. He will bring us into the land. He will give it to us. See, Joshua and Caleb understood. He will give it to us. He will take us into it. He will give it. Don't fear the people of the land. Don't fear them. And so the people were persuaded. Look at verse 10. And all the congregation said, to stone them with stones. Remember, to this point, they just got taught for a month who gets stoned with stones. And it was people that were vile, people that were unclean, people that were out and out blasphemous, right? They were the murderers. That was the price of a murderer or a rapist. And they say, Joshua and Caleb, probably maybe inferring of Moses and Aaron too, that their punishment by this new leadership that's heading back to Egypt is to stone them with stones. Again, you see how vile their hearts are. These guys need a death penalty, a bad death penalty, because they are so wrong and trying to encourage you to believe in God by faith. And now, at that very moment, the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. This glory appeared in the midst of their unbelieving, in the midst of their mourning and unwilling to walk by faith and mad at God that it's so difficult to walk by faith. In the midst of all their longing to actually die. I wish we already were dead. I wish we had died months ago, maybe even back as soon as we left Egypt, so we didn't have to keep suffering following this God who keeps disappointing us. They were suicidal. They accused God of plotting a murder. They would rather go back as slaves in Egypt than to cross that Jordan and walk by faith. They have rejected God's leaders, and they threaten to kill whoever tries to deepen them in trusting God. Crazy stuff here, isn't it? It's interesting. One author points out that what he calls what they have is the slave mentality. You know, we know about the Patty Hearst story, right? Remember, she was the first one where they said what happened to her. One of the, what was it called? It's actually out of Holland. Yeah, the Stockholm. It was actually a Stockholm at where they were bank robbers held people. And the women sided with the bank robbers and started shooting people, trying to help them get out successfully. And when they went to trial, they said they're not guilty because they had a Stockholm syndrome. They were under so much strain that they found the only place to get relief was to side with their captors. And in this case, he sort of takes that saying that they've got the slave mentality. Now, do you remember back what was going on? They were throwing the baby boys in the river, killing them. They were crying out to God because it was so bad. And they kept crying out to God to deliver them. But now they're saying, we want to go back to Egypt and be slaves of these harsh taskmasters because that seems normal to us. That seems comfortable to us. That seems like, that would be such a relief to be a slave again. There are people like that when Satan gets a stronghold in their mind, where they really will try to sabotage themselves. Because when God begins blessing them, they don't know how to take the blessings because their whole life has always been so hard. When it's not hard, they feel like a fish out of water. So they want an environment where things are hard. And if they're not hard, they'll create them to be hard because they got that slave mentality. Well, in verse 11 and 12, then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? How long will they not believe me? All the signs which I performed among them, I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them. I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than we. Remember back in Exodus 32 when the golden calf? God said the same thing then. I will make of you a great nation. Think about it. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. Oh, I like the way that sounds. Well, you know what? Moses never even dignified it with a conversation with God saying, no, I don't want that. He never said that. He didn't even dignify it with anything. But it was interesting that he said, the nation that comes from you, Moses, will actually be greater and mightier than the one coming from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Interesting, isn't it? Well, as back in Exodus 32, when Moses had to be the interceder, like Christ is for us, interceding for us. They're playing this out again, okay? Now we know that God isn't going to give up on Israel. That's one of the greatest promises throughout Genesis. We remember that God will never give up on Israel, the seed of Abraham. But yet, Moses here is having to stand before the Father as Jesus stands before the Father, making intercession for us. What's it look like? In verse 13, he says, Moses said to the Lord, the Egyptians will hear of this, for you brought these people out from among them. So it's all about the glory of God. The Egyptians will hear. And then they will realize that, hey, this scenario that Moses talked about that God revealed to him isn't true. And they will tell the inhabitants of the land, they have heard that you, Lord, are among these people, that you, Lord, had seen the face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nations, plural, which have heard of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was not able to bring this people to the land which he swore to give them. Therefore, he killed them in the wilderness. Now, in the earlier one in Exodus 32 is interesting. He said, the Egyptians will say, I told you, it wouldn't be long till God killed these rebellious people. And it's like, yeah, they said this. They said that you're going to get so irritated, you're going to kill them off in the wilderness. And here it is. You're about ready to do it. But this time around, he just says the people of the other lands, the other nations are going to hear this. And the story is going to be, God will stay faithful and God will keep being your God. God will quit leading you. But there comes a point that he won't tolerate anymore. No more toleration. Is that true? Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. The love, like Jesus, never fails. That isn't the end of the story. And of course, we know to this day The reason we know that God is never going to give up on us is because he still has not given up on Israel. And they have not believed in him for 2,000 years. Their rebellion in 70 AD got them scattered literally to the four corners of the earth. And the Bible said they would come back. And now they have. May 18th, 1948, or May 14th, 1948. They are a nation again. The very first nation that recognized them as a nation, United States. Yeah. What was the nation that did not do that? England. And boy, you can see these two phenomenal countries right after the war. And then after the war, America takes off because God blesses those who bless his people. And England cursed God, and we just see them plummeting ever since. And now, as God had said in Deuteronomy 28, if you don't obey my ways, I'll bring the aliens in to take over your land. And they will make you servants in your own land. Interesting, isn't it? That's what's happening to Europe and England, the UK in particular today. So in verse 17, and now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great. Yes, as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering, abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity, transgression, but by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generation. Here comes the request. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt, even till now. Interesting that Moses goes back into that experience in Exodus 34 when he was put in the cleft of the rock and God covered him there with his hand. He quotes back that to him. The Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, Exodus 34:6. The Lord God, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abounding in goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquities and transgression and sin. And so he basically says, God, your nature forbids you from being any different than how you've been since the day they left Egypt till now. You got to keep being that way tomorrow. And you know, it's true. God is dictated by his own nature, right? He can't be different than himself. That's why if somebody says, well, part of the Bible is wrong. If they were to say that, then they would have to say, then God sometimes is wrong. Well, no, the people who wrote it, God used them, but they messed up. Oh, so God's ways are not perfect through man that God utilizes. So either way, it comes down to changing the nature of God. Because if God's word can be at fault, then guess what? God himself can be at fault. If God's word lies, then God himself could lie. And so he's saying here, God, your very nature is being gracious and merciful and forgiving to forever and ever. And so even though you're feeling this way and you're expressing these emotions of anger and hurt and rejection, you know and I know you need to pardon. So he doesn't really ask it. He just says, pardon them now. And in verse 20, then the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital RD, the tetragrammaton Yahweh said, I pardoned according to your word. There's a nice short verse if you need a short verse to memorize. Do you remember that prophecy many years in Ezekiel? I do think Ezekiel was thinking back on this very time, on this very passage. And remember the Lord speaking through Ezekiel in chapter 22, verse 30, So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it. But I have found none. Interesting here, he said, I looked for a Moses. I couldn't find a Moses. And boy, there were so many that prayed. Samuel's. Remember, we want a king like all the other nations. Samuel's like, absolutely not. And God says, Samuel, give them what they want. Samuel comes out and says, you're going to get what you want. But listen to me. Your work has not changed me. I will not sin in not continuing to pray for you guys. I'm still going to be like God's nature, praying over this people that God would heal the land. And boy, Samuel got to see David, didn't he? A man after God's own heart who did all of God's will. I think of Caleb and Joshua. They've got to come close. I mean, God didn't say about them, they're men after my own heart in the same way. But nevertheless, he comes very, very close to saying that. But it goes on in Ezekiel 22, verse 31. He says in end of verse 30, but I found no one. Therefore, in verse 31, I have poured out on my indignation on them. I have consumed them with the fire of my mouth. I have recompensed their deeds on their own heads, says the Lord God. So I'll just simply ask you this question. What if Moses wasn't there to intercede? I think these people would have been in big problems. So prayer, hands down, is the most important thing we can do for our nation or any church or any family. Well, verse 21 to 23. Oh, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with my glory. Verse 21. I don't want to rush this part. We'll read it, but I'll pick up here next week. Because of all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to the test now these 10 times, it really wasn't 10 times, it's just sort of an expression, have not heeded my voice. They certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those rejected me see it. And then in verse 24 and 25, like I said, we'll pick up next week in verse 21. But my servant Caleb, there it is. What do you think Caleb thought when God said, my servant Caleb? What? God called him my servant like Moses was my servant. Because he has a different spirit in him, has followed me fully. I will bring him into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. They're already coming for you. You got to get out of there because the enemy is going to destroy you if they catch you. Wow. At the end of this chapter is just some very, very important things about the nature of God, bringing judgment still on them after he gave forgiveness to them. And we want to look at that. And then look at Caleb and Joshua some more. Because God says several times about them. Not just once, but several times God talks about Caleb and Joshua.